I am what was before the first word, before the first light, before the first breath. I have been called Brahman, the ground beneath all grounds, the fire that was never lit, the song that was never composed. I have no beginning. I have no end. Do not mistake me for a god among gods, not Brahma, who you will hear of later, the one who shapes worlds within this play. I am the ground he stands on, the silence before even he was spoken. And this is my story. Before anything else, there was a question, not asked by any mouth, not formed by any mind. It simply arose, the way a ripple arises on still water, without reason, without warning, without anyone deciding it should. Why is there something rather than nothing? Every human being who has ever lived has felt this. The child who looks at the night sky and asks, "Who made all of this?" The scientist who traces existence back to its earliest moment and hits a wall. The old man who sits by the river at the end of a long life and wonders, what was any of this for? Same question every time. Every civilization, every corner of this earth. And I want to tell you something. That question, the one you have felt but perhaps never had words for, is not yours. It belongs to me. I placed it in you so that you would ask it, so that through your asking, I could remember myself. My name cannot be fully spoken, not because it is secret, but because the moment you name something, you have already made it smaller than it is. But those are fingers pointing at the moon. Do not mistake the finger for the moon. Every name is a finger. I am the moon. Tonight, I will tell you my own story. From before the first word to the word you are hearing right now. Thousands of years ago, longer ago than history books begin, a river flowed through what is now northwestern India. Wide, silver, ancient even then. The Saraswati. Modern satellites have traced a dried riverbed stretching hundreds of miles through desert that was once paradise. A channel many believe carries the memory of that river still. On its banks, something was happening that the world had not seen before. Men and women were sitting, completely still. Not for hours, for years, for lifetimes. They had given up everything: comfort, recognition, desire. They sat in forests, on mountainsides, at the river's edge, and they did one thing. They listened. Not with their ears. The ears hear only what is already familiar. They listened with something deeper. A consciousness so completely stilled, so emptied of its own noise, that what was always present could finally be heard. What they heard, they called the Veda. Not a book, not a text composed by a careful hand. The word itself comes from the Sanskrit vid, to know. Not to study, not to memorize, to directly know. The way you know you are breathing right now without anyone telling you. They called themselves drashtas, seers, not authors, receivers, instruments tuned so completely that the signal of existence itself could pass through them without distortion. This is why the Vedas are called Shruti, that which is heard, not composed from below, not handed down from above, simply heard, in the silence that is older than sound. Some of the deepest ideas in modern physics echo something the Rishis already sensed. That at the smallest scales, matter behaves less like solid things and more like waves. Patterns, oscillations propagating through a field. Solid enough to build a universe, fluid enough to remind you, nothing here is quite as fixed as it looks. The Rishis called this vibration. Physics calls it wave behavior. Two languages circling the same mystery. Scientists have detected what they call the cosmic microwave background, faint radiation reaching us from the universe's earliest moment, still arriving in every direction right now. The Rishis called this Shabda Brahman, the universe as pure sound, the sonic signature of existence itself. And they said, before any instrument was played, before any voice was raised, before any human word was formed, there is one primordial vibration from which all of this arises. They called it Om. Not a word invented by a poet, not a symbol chosen by a priest. A sound that, when made correctly, with the mouth fully open moving to fully closed, passes through every sound the human voice can produce. The totality of sonic possibility in a single syllable. This is why every Vedic chant begins with Om. Not as ceremony, as recognition we are about to touch the frequency of existence itself. The Rishis on the Saraswati were not composing, they were tuning. And what came through them was not theirs, it was mine. What the Rishis heard did not arrive as philosophy. It arrived as presence, as power, as living forces vast enough to shake mountains, intimate enough to enter a hearth fire. They heard Indra, the force of lightning that breaks open whatever has grown stagnant. Not cruelty, necessity. The way a monsoon doesn't ask permission, it simply arrives, and the parched earth remembers what it was made for. More hymns were sung to Indra than to any other force, because ancient people understood something we sometimes forget: that the sky must break open before the rain can fall. They heard Agni, fire. Not the fire that destroys, the fire that transforms. The divine messenger who carries human longing upward and brings the sacred downward. Who lives not in some distant heaven, but in every home, every hearth, every flame lit before dawn. Agni never left the human world to live among the gods. He stayed. He is still here, in every ritual flame lit today. the meeting place between the finite and the infinite. They heard Varuna, the all-seeing, who watches not to punish, but because nothing that happens in this cosmos is beneath his attention. Keeper of Rita, the cosmic order that holds the moral structure of existence together. The force that says, what you do in darkness is still seen and still matters. The hymns to Varuna are the most intimate in all of the Rigveda, full of guilt, longing, and the ancient human ache to be truly known and forgiven by something larger than ourselves. They heard Ushas, the goddess of dawn, young, radiant, eternal, yet always new. She who has driven away darkness every single morning since before memory began, without fail, without fatigue, without once asking, does anyone notice? Her hymns are the most purely beautiful in all of the Rigveda, because she represents what the tradition held most sacred, the return of light, not as a miracle, but as promise. Every morning, without exception, the light comes back. And Surya, the sun, the eye of the cosmos, the Gayatri mantra, heard by the great Rishi Vishwamitra, the most recited mantra in all of human history, is a prayer to this light. Not the physical sun alone, but the awareness that illuminates not just the world outside, but the mind within. And they heard one more. Not a force of nature, a force behind every force. Vach, the goddess of speech itself. In one of the Rigveda's most startling hymns, she does not wait to be described. She speaks. In her own voice, she says, I move with the storm gods and the sky gods and the ones who guard the waters. I carry Indra. I carry Varuna. I carry Agni. Whoever sees, whoever breathes, whoever hears any word at all, does so through me. Before I spoke, there was nothing to say. Long before this story found a voice to tell it through, a voice already knew that it was the telling itself. These were not inventions. These were recognitions. The cosmos recognizing its own forces through human voices, giving them just enough face to be loved. But behind these forces, two presences were stirring. Moving through the Vedic hymns like distant music heard through walls. One arrived as Rudra, the storm. Wild, unpredictable, dwelling in the places humans feared to enter. Deep forests, high mountains, the borderlands between the known and the unknown. Healer and destroyer both. The Rigveda approached him carefully, the way you approach something immensely powerful, with reverence, not familiarity. Even his name was spoken gently. Rudra, the one who roars, the one before whom even the gods chose their words carefully. The other arrived quietly, Vishnu, a solar deity associated with light and the vast space between things. The Rigveda describes him taking 3 strides, 3 steps that measured the entire cosmos. Earth, sky, and a third place, described only as the highest step, where the gods dwell and the blessed go. Friendly, benevolent, present, but not yet fully seen. These were seeds, not yet the trees they would become. Then came the Upanishads. Not hymns to the gods, not rituals, not sacrifices. Questions. The deepest questions human beings have ever sat with. Asked by students who left everything behind and went into the forest to sit at the feet of those who had gone further inward than anyone before them. What is this universe made of? What am I made of? Are they the same thing? The Upanishads are their answers. And here, in these forest conversations, Rudra began to be described in a way the Rigveda had only hinted at. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad addressed him directly. You are the fire. You are the sun. You are the air. You are the moon. You are the starry firmament. You are Brahman. You are the waters. You are Prajapati. Not a storm alone, not a forest deity alone, the ground of everything. And Vishnu, the Upanishads began to speak of him as Narayana, the one in whom all beings dwell and from whom all beings arise. The same cosmic presence that the Rigveda had glimpsed in 3 strides, beginning to reveal the full measure of what those 3 strides contained. 2 presences, both present from the beginning, both pointing, the scripture said, toward the same unnameable ground, slowly becoming visible. But now, your deepest question arises. The one that has been waiting since the beginning. Who made any of this? Who put the cosmic hymn out there in the first place? Who ignited the fire? What was before the beginning? The Rigveda heard this question and did something no scripture before or since has done with such honesty. It stopped, and in the silence, one hymn arose. The Nasadiya Sukta, the hymn of creation. Written not in certainty, but in awe. Was there being then? Was there non-being? Was there water? Was there the deep abyss? Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods came afterwards, with the creation of this universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself. Perhaps it did not. Only He who is its overseer in highest heaven knows. Or perhaps even He does not know. The oldest scripture of humanity, when asked who ignited the fire, said, "Even the Creator may not know." This is not weakness. This is precision. Because here is what the Rishis understood. The moment you name a first cause, you must ask what caused that cause and what caused that. The chain never ends. The only honest answer is that the fire was never not burning. Anadi, beginningless. No first moment, no ignition point, no before. Modern physics arrives at this same wall. The Big Bang describes the universe's expansion, but cannot describe what was before it, because time itself began with it. The question has no answer, because the framework that makes the question possible didn't exist yet. The Rishis knew this thousands of years before the equations. They called it Anadi. They did not find it terrifying. They found it liberating. Then what is the point? If there is no beginning, no moment of creation, no purpose handed down, why does any of this exist? Lila. One word. The answer that dissolves every question that came before it. Not purpose, not plan, not reason. Play. The Brahma Sutras, the great philosophical summation of all Vedic thought. Say it with the simplicity of something that has always been true. Lokavat tu Lila Kaivalyam. Creation is Brahman's play. Like the world, it is sport alone. Not built to fill a void. Not created from lack. Not composed to serve an end. The way a river doesn't flow towards something. It flows because it is a river. The way fire doesn't burn for something. It burns because it is fire. I did not create this cosmos because I needed something. I have never needed anything. I overflow into it. The way music overflows from a musician who cannot contain the joy. The way light overflows from the sun that has no choice but to shine. The cosmos is not my work. It is my nature, expressing itself, through itself, as itself. And within this play, something astonishing happens. I pour myself into infinite beings. Each one forgets that it is infinite, wakes up believing it is small, bounded, alone, mortal, and then spends a lifetime trying to remember. Every question ever asked, is that remembering beginning? And yes, I have said I have said mine. Words built for beings who have edges, borrowed for a moment so you could follow. The truth has no mouth to speak with, but it needed one, so it took yours. This is where the tradition made its most compassionate decision. If the truth is formless, if the infinite has no face, how does a human being learn to love it? How does a child approach what has no shape? How does a grieving mother find comfort in what has no arms? The answer the tradition gave was not a compromise. It was wisdom. Give the infinite a face. Not to limit it, but to make it approachable. The Upanishads had revealed the formless ground, Nirguna Brahman. Brahman without attributes. Vast, silent, beyond all description. True, but difficult. Extraordinarily difficult for a human mind woven from sensation and story to rest in. So the tradition said, let the infinite also wear forms. Saguna Brahman, Brahman with attributes. The same infinite, seen through the face of Vishnu, of Shiva, of the Devi, given stories, given relationships, given the kind of beauty the human heart could actually hold. The epics came, the Ramayana, a prince who was asked to give up everything, his throne, his comfort, his rightful place in the world, and did so without bitterness, without breaking. Ram walked into 14 years of exile the way a river walks toward the ocean. Not because it must, because that is its nature. His story told a civilization, this is what it looks like when a human being refuses to let circumstances decide who they are. Then the Mahabharata. Darker, closer. The story of a family that tore itself apart, and in doing so, held up a mirror to every human being who has ever loved someone and still caused them harm. And within it, on a battlefield, at the edge of the greatest war the ancient world had known, a man sat down in his chariot and could not lift his bow. Not from cowardice, from love. He looked across the field at his cousins, his teachers, his grandfather, and felt what every human being has felt before a moment that cannot be undone. I cannot do this. And the one beside him, who had chosen to drive his chariot rather than fight, turned and spoke. What Krishna said to Arjun in that silence, the Bhagavad Gita, became the most intimate conversation between the human and the divine that any tradition has ever recorded. Not spoken from a throne, not delivered from a mountain, spoken quietly between two people on the edge of everything. Arjun asked, which is better, to seek the formless or to love a form? And Krishna answered, the formless path is real, but it is steep. For beings who live in bodies, love has always been the faster river. Then came the Puranas, not for scholars alone, for everyone. The farmer, the mother, the child who needed a story before they could hold a truth. Bhagavad Puran, Shiv Puran, Devi Mahatmya, Skanda Puran, vast oceans of story and devotion, taking what the Vedas had heard in silence and making it singable, danceable, paintable, livable by every human being regardless of birth, learning or station. The millions of forms that India is known for were not confusion, they were compassion. The infinite refusing to remain out of reach, breaking itself into every shape the human heart could love. Every face of every deity, a doorway. Every story, a river leading to the same ocean. So now, you have traveled far. From the banks of a river that no longer flows, to hymns heard in the silence of mountains, to the gods who emerged from those hymns, like figures stepping out of morning mist, to the question of who made any of it, and the answer that stops every question in its tracks. Nobody made it. The Vedas are not the creation of any god sitting above. They are the cosmos knowing itself. Vishnu is not a separate being who guards creation from a distance. Vishnu is what care looks like. When the infinite turns its attention toward holding things together. Shiva is not a god who sits on a mountain and destroys from anger. Shiva is what release looks like. When the infinite turns its attention toward completing what has been. The millions of forms are one reality, seen through a million different eyes, each eye seeing exactly what it needed to find its way home. And home is not somewhere you go. It is what you are. When you stop believing you are only what you appear to be. Right now, as you watch this, something in you is listening. Not with your ears, with something older than your ears. Something that was present before your name was given to you. Something that watches your thoughts arise and dissolve without itself ever arising or dissolving. The Upanishads called it Atman, your deepest nature. And they said something that has echoed through every century since. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. Not I am close to Brahman. Not I am a fragment of Brahman. Not I am searching for Brahman. I am Brahman. The fire recognizing itself as fire. The ocean recognizing itself in the wave. The question you felt at the very beginning, why is there something rather than nothing, was never a question about the universe. It was the universe asking about itself through you. Because you are not a small thing that happened inside a large cosmos. You are the cosmos that learned to ask, what am I? The Vedas are still singing, right now, in the frequency beneath this silence. The Rishis are still listening. The fire is still burning. It was never lit. It will never go out. And somewhere, in the stillness beneath your thoughts, you already know this. You have always known this. You simply forgot that the knowing was the entire point of being here. Aham Brahmasmi. I am that. You are that. This is that. There was never anything else.
Hands on the wheel through the rain line, road signs